Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Her Drive Sovereign series. I am always excited for every single guest that comes on. I'm really excited for today's guest. She is a BDSM coach, a Kanoko rope instructor, and in my opinion, just, I don't know, a badass in general. So thank you so much, Julieta Chiara, for being here. It is a pleasure, and I can't wait to dive into all things that you are and do.
Thank you for having me, especially after having you in a few of my programs and obviously following you in your journey, which is so inspirational to me as well, because you do it all. You're doing all sorts of stuff. I'm like, damn, girl.
Well, thank you for noticing. It is true. I am, what do they say? A jack of all trades, master of none.
I think you're the master of all, which is the sweet spot. And it's interesting. Like I love seeing your spirituality side. And then the more like BDSM side and like this like fusion that you're doing with it. So I'm super inspired by that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it so much. I mean, we have an idea who sees us and how they interpret us online. And most of the time, I'm like, fuck it. I mean, I'm just being authentic. And I think you are like the queen of authenticity and being someone who is a BDSM coach seems to be quite freeing and fun. But in like today's social media filtering situation, it just seems like a hard space to be in and operate a business. So I'd love to dive into all of that. But first, I would like if you would introduce yourself in a more formal way, kind of share a bit of your story and how you got to where you are now. And then we can dive into all that other serious stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, I am a sex and BDSM coach, and that actually started around, we're coming up on like 9 years because I went to school originally to be a sex therapist. And while I was in school to be a sex therapist, I had started a sex blog because I was so inspired by everything I was learning. And I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah. Okay. Like, it's land of the Mormons. And as you can imagine, I started a blog with my community from Salt Lake City, Utah, and that exploded. And the blog was about sex, sex toys, sex toy reviews. And that's not something that people in my community were doing. So it took off and it had a mind of its own. And by the time I graduated college, I had the option to either be a therapist or go off with the business I started. And I chose to go off with the business I started. So for the better half of almost a decade, I have been either sex blogging, and now that has transformed into sex and BDSM coaching. Because while you can go to school for the sex part, there is no formal school for the BDSM part. That just means I had to be a freak for 10 years to figure it out.
Mm.
Yeah. And there's more, I mean, there's resources now, right? Now there's like BDSM schools and people we can learn from or learning from me, or I think you're learning from someone too. So it's a beautiful field to be in because what I found over the last decade of doing this essentially is that everyone needs help, inspiration, or movement or change in this area of their life. And I'd say almost 100% of people I meet are kinky in some way, shape, or form.
They absolutely are. I'm curious, is there one kink that you've found in all of your studies and teachings that has been the most obscure?
I think there is always varying levels of dominance and submission
Mm.
or types of DS dynamics that people want to be in, whether they know that or not.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And for those who are not too educated or familiar with BDSM, can we dive into that a little bit and what it means?
Man, there's a lot going on in there. We got bonded. BDSM is an acronym for a set of behaviors within kink that have to do with very particular actions. So you have bondage discipline, which I think I dabble in both of those. Then dominance and submission, which I do as well. And then sadism and masochism, which I think when people think BDSM, they look at the sadism masochism part
Mm.
the most, which is they're like, oh, you're into BDSM, you like pain or you like receiving pain,
Mm.
which is not the case. So that would be what BDSM is. It's just a set of behaviors that fall into there, and they're not always sexual. They can be, but not always.
So when you say they don't have to be sexual, how would someone navigate that, and what does it look like to be non-sexual but within the space?
Yeah, a wonderful example is my rope practice. So I teach professional Japanese rope bondage, better known as shibari, and that is done usually from a completely non-sexual space. It's has more of the elements of dominance and submission, like that deep surrender, and yes, playing with different intensities, but there's usually no sex involved when you get to at least my professional level. So that's an example of having no sex involved in a kink.
Beautiful. And I guess the follow-up question to all of that is, what is shibari for those who have no clue what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, shibari has become quite the buzzword lately, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like all of a sudden the internet woke up and said, well, I love shibari.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's the same thing with a BDSM in some ways as well.
Yeah, I'm seeing it now being in Tulum and seeing how it's finally bleeding into like the tantra community, which they used to really reject anything of that nature. So it's been a little bit of a like a mind fuck to see.
Mm-hmm.
But shibari, in its essence, is a form of Japanese rope bondage. And so that is just the tying and bonding of someone with rope. Why is it specific to Japan? It's because it was used as ancient warfare. So prisoners used to be tied up in certain ways in order to reflect their crimes, how long they would be there for, etc. It's not completely clear. I've since researched that it's a bit dramatized that it's not as accurate as we might think. And it's also used in a martial art called hojujutsu that's still used now in Japan, which involves heavy binding of someone with rope. The reason it'd be different than any other type of rope bondage is because it's usually very specific designs, knots. It tends to be more intense than what you would see in the West. And it's really based in history and beauty. And then obviously, what do humans do? We make it kinky, we make it dirty.
Oh
so,
yeah.
so now, even though it's, in Japan, it's really of like a taboo art form per se. It's in the West mostly like this heavy BDSM thing that we think of.
Hmm.
So I view it as both, right? Because my toes are in both worlds, and I think they can both exist with each other or without each other.
Hmm. That makes perfect sense. And I think that kink is such a fun way for adults to play.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, this is the most fun. I mean, I have a lot of fun in my life. I'm like, this is the most fun when you let me play, like do role play, or since learning some shibari from you, like let me tie myself up, or come here, friend, let me see what I can do with this. I just feel like I'm lit on fire and I never need to be penetrated. It has nothing to do with, even like you mentioned in some forms, sex. It's just the creative release that comes with play.
And one of my favorite people in the shibari space, her name is Midori, and she is a Japanese American woman, from my understanding, and she's basically coined as being the one person that brought shibari to the West.
Hmm.
She wrote some of the earliest books in English on it, and she's incredible. She still hosts education and stuff. But what always stuck with me is she said, BDSM and kink, it's childlike play with adult privileges. And I think that's where I confuse people when I tell them BDSM. There's elements of it that are just so innocent because really, I think as adults, we forget to play.
Mm.
We forget to have fun. We forget to tune out from this like deep dark world that we're in right now.
Mhm, mhm.
So the leather and the chains, it might look intimidating, but I promise you, it is more mirrored to just children having fun.
Oh, yeah, it's very juicy. Beautiful. Well, I wanna dive a little bit back into your story. When you decided to start your blog, and it expanded pretty rapidly, and then you made the choice to follow your business, how was that received in your community and in your family? And did it alter your internal space in some way?
So I'm a bit of an outlier in the sense that it didn't affect me at all. I have a very open sexual family. They always knew I would end up on some path of this nature. We're very open with each other about, like, for example, we had sex and we went to our parents and told them. And
Mm.
then they gave us resources to take care of ourselves, right? And so ironically, my whole family works for me. That did not change anything. They work for me in various capacities for my brand and my business. In terms of social climate, it was really well received. Whether that be people supporting it outwardly, but usually in the Mormon community, it ended up being more of a private support
Mm.
because these are people that they're struggling on their own, but because of their societal stance, they're too scared to publicly support that. So in my eyes, doing this shift, it really just grew my community and affirmed what I was meant to do. And I'm really, really, really lucky that it did not infer any social or family implications for me. I was very, very lucky.
Yeah, I think that certainly is a blessing for so many of us, myself included. There's been a great deal of rejection from some people based on being authentic. And in my opinion, most people who are being authentic are very harmless. If anything, they're so much more inspirational. So I love that that was the path that allowed for you to just, I don't want to say glide, but like to move smoothly and to create a space for so many people to dive deeper into what is extremely personal. You know, our sex lives are extremely private for many, and there can be a lot of shame there too, especially in my experience with people with specific desires that they have and being kind of shunned from their loved ones for having those desires. So I'm curious, when your clients come to you, what are some challenges that you see that are most common, and what are some paths and tools that you may use to help them open up a bit?
Yeah. I mean, shame is usually top 10, you know. I think with anything regarding sex or kink, by the time you are seeking help for someone to help you with it, there is some sort of shame attached to that. And ironically, the remedy to that shame, the most powerful one, is just talking to someone about it.
Mm.
Usually, the people that harbor the most shame around their sexuality or their kinks is because they haven't been able to voice that to someone, or if it was voiced to someone, like you said, it was not received well, or it was ostracized. So, just having an open pathway, like you and I are talking here, where whatever you say or do will not be met with any sort of reaction outside of acceptance. That's usually a giant healing method outside of then education to let people know. My favorite phrase in coaching is you're not as unique as you think you are. Because when we have these insecurities, the shame, these problems, we think we are the only one, right? We're like, I'm the only one dealing with this. So once I'm really able to guide clients through the statistics of how many people have their kink, how many people have the same sexual shame, and how normal what they desire actually is, getting over the sexual shame is a pretty smooth ride.
That's beautiful.
You
Mm.
need someone to validate that it's normal. And that's usually the most powerful thing. But I'd say the most common thing is people come to me because they're confused about how to get into this lifestyle. Because I can only imagine. I mean, fuck. I'm creating an entire course right now based off of that because when I got into BDSM and kink, there wasn't resources like educators or things like that. You had Reddit and fucking praying. You were praying everything would go okay.
Mm.
And so most people, I think they just want a blueprint. They just want some sort of guidance that makes them feel secure on discovering new things. Because yeah, it is scary trying something new. So I tend to be, I guess, the organizer. I call it kinky preschool. I direct you, you do.
Magnificent. That's really cute. Um, oh, hello, little kitten. Excuse me. My puss is trying to get my attention. Um, I know that you foster some kittens from time to time.
Yeah. Sadly, I
Really?
don't have any with me right now. So
Oh
sad.
no. but they have good homes now.
I know, I know. That's
Hmm.
right. I love yours. Mwah.
Can you hear that, baby? Sorry, back to our programming, everyone. So with the for the folks who are looking, yes, we have apps and things like I've used. Oh shoot, Fields. I feel like that was been the best one that I've found in recent years to at least explore. It is a bit intimidating because if you're new to the whole thing and then you're trying to connect with people who are also within that mindset, but you don't know them, what are some best practices? Say, we'll do two scenarios when you're connecting with someone on a digital space, and then two, if you're going to say a party. Do you have some best practices for both of those techniques?
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm setting people up to do it digitally, which I like the digital space because it gives you a bit of a buffer, right? In the BDSM community, we're really huge on vetting someone. And so, what it means to vet someone is to really ensure that they are a safe person to practice with. And I find that when you are in a digital plane, the safest and most effective thing you can do is just be super, super, super clear on your boundaries,
Mm,
on your desires, and what consent means to you. So then you can base the conversations you have around that. I think what happens is when people aren't super clear on those, or at least don't have a baseline to start from, they tend to be a bit more impressionable to what
mm,
people will suggest to them. And that's usually where I've seen a lot of situations that maybe turned out less than desirable, or someone definitely found out a limit, which would be something that they fucking hate or they do not want.
mm.
So the more clarity you can have on the things that you desire and being really unshakable, and to tie it into your podcast, sovereign,
Mm,
the more sovereign and confident and unshakable you can be with what you need at a core will usually provide the assets for really good safety. In terms of in person, it's bringing the same thing. Can you look at someone in the eye and say, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what consent means to me, this is what makes me feel safe, this is what I'm not going to do, can you meet me there?
mm.
Anybody who questions those things versus trying to either be curious or share their own desires, we say in Spanish, la puerta means the door. Ciao.
Beautiful. Mm.
Your experience, how has field been for you? I know field is like I love field, but then yes, sometimes it's an interesting set of people that maybe they jump the gun a little too fast without the tools.
Well, I think that's fair. There's definitely, I don't know what the proper term is, but there's some like just super horny people out there, and I haven't actually used it in quite a while. It's been since last summer. I just took a break from formal dating to focus on some things that I needed to do personally. But before that, yeah, there were some interesting characters that showed up. Simultaneously, there were a lot of amazing people who understood boundaries and consent and are still in my life to this day in a really, I would say, a pretty regular basis where we communicate deeply about things beyond just like kink connection, and it's been beautiful. So I look at it, the online space is almost a mirrored image of society in real life, like the third dimension. Because I feel like if I go to we'll say a bar, if I go to a bar, there's going to be a lot of characters that behave in one way, and then a dabbling of other types. And that was kind of my experience. So, do you find other platforms to be a better? How do I want to use the word? Like more I don't want to use any of these words. I would say a platform that is more in alignment with proper negotiations and behaviors, and not just being thirsty and coming at you full force.
Well, that's a hard one to answer because where you give people free will, they will do what they want. So I have found that field, at least for me personally, is the best. But I have a really strong profile with the things that I had mentioned before. And so for anyone listening, I advise, even if it feels like your profile on these dating apps is like a summary synopsis from school, it let it be crazy. Put it all out on the table. That way people don't waste your time. The only other resource which I don't like for beginners would be FetLife
Hmm.
if you have experience with it. The interface is old. It's a bit intense. It's uncensored. So if you are new to this lifestyle and you get on FetLife, the odds of you being overwhelmed are really, really, really high. Extremely high. You're going to see things you've probably never seen before. The messages are usually really direct with what people want to do. So I like to prime people with field before we send them to Fet.
That's fair. Oh man, there's actually a whole Rolodex of terminology used in this space. So, what are some words that you think that the average person wouldn't know unless they moved into exploring kink?
I think I think some of the average words they might not know. They probably know the words, but they don't know them in the context that we use them. So for example, negotiation. In your eyes, what do you think negotiation is?
Oh, I mean, that's just us both working towards what we both want in a compromised way.
Exactly. So it's the same thing, but on a kinky level. And that's what separates. I have this theory that if everybody learned how BDSM and kink works, they don't have to go on and be kinky, but they would be much better humans and lovers.
Hmm.
Because before you stepped into this life, or before I stepped into this life, did I ever have any sort of negotiation on how a sexual encounter would go down, how a kinky encounter would go down? I never did. So a lot of people are unaware that, before they see the very extreme thing that they saw on the internet, there was probably a very lengthy conversation and negotiation about how that would actually play out.
That's such a great point. Oof. Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for sharing. So I think that, well, yeah, my first partner and I, as like high schoolers, I felt like we were pretty kinky. And I was like, as much as a high schooler can be, and well, maybe they can be more, but for me, I'm like, I'm pretty kinky. So I've been like open to experiences and novelties for a long time, but there certainly wasn't any type of like negotiation going on. And I've seen over time how now there's a much more empowered experience that I engage in when I decide to play. And I also have found through like power dynamics, which is what I played more with in the last 5 years. I really explored that more from a subspace than a dom space. I thought, oh, I'm just being kinky. And this is fun to play and it's just a sexual atmosphere. But what I found through that was a deep spiritual connection, which I didn't equate with BDSM prior to that. And I am deeply spiritual in other modalities. But I think there's this misconception that BDSM is like evil or dark, and it's not healing. It's actually re-traumatizing. So I would love to hear your opinion on these experiences and what it really can be.
Yeah. I mean, the number one misconception that people are going to have is that, again, if I told you at the beginning, people usually view BDSM as more of just sadism, masochism. That's all they see when they see it. Their first thing is, oh, BDSM is dark and it is abusive.
Hmm.
And I disagree with both of those things. One, something that is consensual between two adults by default cannot be abusive. So if you are consenting to what is happening, by default, we are not entering a space of abuse. And again, when we know that there's a lot of negotiation that goes on and the deepest talks of consent and expectations, etc., we're really set up for a place of safety versus what some might say abuse. And then when people say it's dark, well, having all the skills it takes to practice BDSM safely and with some of the things I told you, I think it requires a certain sense of commitment, learning, which then turns into enlightenment. So I look at BDSM as a very enlightened form of sexual play or just human relating. because you are going to have to put in way more effort than whatever you were taught in your society.
Mhm.
You are going to have to evolve. You are going to have to be better. You have to be accountable. You have to be responsible. So I see it as a very enlightened form of human relating versus just the bare minimum that we have to do in society.
Absolutely. And I think you know this. I went through a formal dominatrix training at the end of last year and the start of this year. And for me, it was more of an empowerment step slash I wanted to speak with and learn from a woman who was doing this professionally, who is also a psychologist. And because that nourishes so many aspects of the way that my brain and body work and how I like to be educated. And through that process, I was sharing it with my community of people, and I had a lot of interesting dialogue with the people in my life in regards to who would want to submit and who would never want to submit. And it seemed like there was a lot of men who were like, I have no interest in being a submissive. I only want to dominate because that's masculine. And there was just some interesting in my mind, I'm thinking, well, you should probably experience what it's like to be submissive before you completely write it off. And also, there's a balance in understanding both sides of the coin. And so, I'd love to dive into your thoughts on that and how people can explore both the dom and the subspace to relate and be better at both.
Yeah. Did you train with Colette?
I did. Hmm.
Oh my God, I love her.
Yeah.
I just love Colette so much. I'm only her Instagram fan, but then after this, she might hear that I just love her.
Perfect.
And so, I mean, I here's how I like to explain it. It's because I mean, I live in Tulum. I'm surrounded by a lot of very spiritual people. And again, I told you I had tantric people here who are very adverse to my BDSM practice, but what dominance and submission really comes down to is polarity. It's really what it is. It's the yin to the yang, it's the feminine to the masculine. It is the surrender to the give, you know, the giver to the receiver, whatever you want to call it. It's about creating balance and it's not about creating disbalance. So when you have like the men that are like, "Oh, I will never be submissive," that and they actually hold like a little bit of hatred towards that, for me that's a very imbalanced person because they're not willing to surrender in any form. They're not willing to adjust their feminine in any form. So I would say it's just a delicate balance of polarity. It's being able to see, you know, can you give as much as you receive? Can you receive as much as you give? Obviously, within that experimentation, you might find, hey, I like giving a little more, or I like receiving a little more, or I'm a switch and I love doing both. So you find your flavor, but I think there's almost like a due diligence and like you said about trying out the side that maybe you're a bit apprehensive about.
Mm.
One of my favorite gay friends, I remember he's like the best tops have always been bottoms. Because we're able to have a really good scope about what the other person that we're connecting with is either receiving or giving. We have more respect and we appreciate the polarity that we are creating together. Because I don't know if you've had any experiences in your either in your normal sex life or in your kinky life or even just in friendships. You can tell when that balance is fucking off or when someone doesn't want to try to go into balance. And that doesn't have to be just with dominance and submission, but it is felt when someone does not want to see your side and does not want to come into balance with you.
Ooh, I've never heard it phrased that way as far as like normal life, but I know that feeling. I know what it's like for sure. I think everyone can relate. So, sticking with the experimentation of life and the yin and the yang and our tantric friends, I find it very interesting that there's now this awakening or realization within that community that there's so many similarities. Do you have any suspicions as to why it's finally happening?
First, I mean, the I don't have a suspicion, I have a frustration. And
Mm.
the first frustration I have is how I feel a deep frustration because that community, I've lived here for 4 years and I'm surrounded by an almost 100% tantric community. And the only, I haven't been shunned this much or pushed away or maybe judged since I was in like kindergarten, right? And
Mm,
it's all because they used to look at BDSM as like dark energy. Or I really, really I'm displeased when people refer to BDSM as shadow work.
mm,
'Cause that's when we refer to BDSM as shadow work, we are inherently stating that anybody who engages in it has trauma, is traumatized, is broken, and is exploring the worst sides of themselves, which I think you and I have proven that is absolutely not true.
mhm, mhm.
But now that people are seeing the similarities, because really when it comes down to is an energy exchange, I always like to tell people, I'm like, BDSM is just Tantra with better tools. Instead of a heavy breathing into each other's mouths, we spit in each other's mouths. It's the same old thing.
Glorious. I love that so so much. Well, there is an aspect of it where people sometimes like to play out their traumas, right? So, say
Mhm.
there's a couple and one person wants to relive a certain scenario
Mhm.
that was a traumatizing event to them. How could they potentially work through that? Do you recommend it? And if you do, what would be the formula for them to do it in a safe way that could cause re-traumatization, or do you even believe that re-traumatization could happen in that scenario?
I'm a full body yes and no
Hmm.
on concepts on using BDSM for trauma. Do I think it's useful for healing trauma? Yes. Do I think people have the tools to do that in a way that wouldn't re-traumatize them? No.
Mm.
So I think it takes a special type of scenario. So, for example, I think the people that are most fit. So, well, let me go back. Why would people want to relive their trauma through a BDSM or kink space? And I think that's a common question I get is like, why would someone want to reenact what happened to them that really like fucked them up in the first place? And are you familiar with NLP?
Mhm.
Yeah. And so I really like to refer it to like a timeline activity in NLP, which is going back to whatever it is that's blocking us and being able to basically rewrite that narrative. So, an abuse survivor could go back and reenact what happened to them, but this time it's from a place of deep power, consent, and choice versus whatever happened to them was probably not made with those aspects. So, there is a scientific backing as to why that's healing because finally you're reclaiming your power. You are
Mm.
reclaiming the power that someone stole from you, and that happens with a number of scenarios. Now, if you don't have the correct tools to create safety, create proper consent, and have a partner who's deeply understanding of what you are trying to accomplish, you could risk re traumatizing. So, usually, my best advice is to before you really want to delve into that, make sure you've done your due diligence by seeing a therapist, right? By like really working out the nitty gritty of those details of those feelings. So that way, when you choose to step into reenacting your traumas, whether that's mostly like CNC for the most part, which is called consensual non consent for most people, that will just be called a rape fantasy. You need to go in strong, you need to go in empowered. There can't be loose ends.
Mm.
That's where I think there's a little bit of risk. So yeah, I'm pretty half and half on that because it's just going to depend on the person, and I think how far you are in that level of healing and security to where you feel bold and brave enough to step in and be able to reclaim what you're trying to find.
Mm. Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing. I think for me, one of the things that I would like to play out at some point, and I could probably make this happen tomorrow, it just a lot of other things going on, but a scenario I would love to do in a role play format is to set up in like my little office space and I'm working and then like my boss comes in and starts making a move and I feel like it's kind of a probably very played out. But the scenario for me would be to flip the script and then like basically dominate him and punish him for being a bad boy and like being a bad boss. And I think that plays into the rewriting of memories and not that memory, not that I have a memory like that specifically, but that is the best way for me to encapsulate so many scenarios in my life when I've been treated as a an object rather than being respected for the totality that I am. And I've just been disrespected. And I like the idea of making it a playful way to flip it so that when I come into my full life now, which I do a pretty good job of this nowadays, but is to say to the person, I don't like this, and give them the chance to either exit or, depending on the scenario, they're gone immediately. And that's why I think that this role play can be really powerful. And that's why, again, like I wanted to step into the dominatrix form for myself because I felt like I was disempowered in some ways. I'm like, okay, let me put on my like cat suit of strength and embody like being a bad bitch and not just like this sweet little like cutie pie that I am most of the time.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, by the time, you know, who you are in your intimate and sex life is who you are in your everyday life. And so if that version of you becomes the most empowered, educated, outspoken version, all sides of your life are going to benefit. Yeah, because I'm with you at this point. I look at almost like the, I don't want to say pushover past version of me, but like the copy and paste form that we were supposed to be as females. That we were supposed to be like subordinate, submissive in a real life degrading way, that we were not supposed to talk back, that we're supposed to just take harassment in these like workplace settings, et cetera, et cetera. I can't even fucking think about that now because we would lay them on a table, as would you. And so being able to really play that kink out in a safe way to where it can become playful, it's exhilarating. It's super
Mm-hmm.
cathartic.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, so much. Well, I'd love to dive into the aspect of kind of shaking off good girl syndrome that plagues pretty much every single female. What does good girl syndrome look like, feel like, and what are some ways that women can shake themselves up and out of that scenario that they play?
Yeah, good girl syndrome. Yeah, I mean, coming from Utah, good. I feel like we invented good girl syndrome because when it comes to the Mormon Church or the fundamentalist church, which is better known as polygamist, I don't know if you've seen the Netflix documentary on Warren Jeffs, but they have a saying. It's like be quiet and be sweet. So the good girl syndrome would really just be having an incredibly, and this is not empowered submissive. This is like a doormat type personality where it's like I'm going to just take whatever is told to me and I'm not going to stand up for myself. I'm going to do what other people tell me to do. And I think for me when growing up there, it was like the importance of I want to look good. I don't want to get embarrassed. I don't want to disappoint anyone. So good girl syndrome in its totality, it's putting everybody else's needs and opinions before yours.
Hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
in my work, especially with women who have good girl syndrome, I've actually even met some men with good girl syndrome, believe it or not.
I believe it.
The biggest step forward is finding confidence and empowerment.
Hmm.
So that has to be, it's like, okay, what do you stand for? Can you be confident in saying what you stand for? And building resiliency also on the fact that not everybody is going to agree with you, like you, or want to support you in what you're doing. Because with good girl syndrome, we're molding that bread, girl. We are trying to be liked by everyone. We are trying to keep our families happy. We are trying to make all the men in our life love us, the whole shebang. So it's coming out strong, kind of like Cher. Cher is a great example. She does what she wants.
Fuck yeah.
Cher does what she wants. She fucks who she wants. She's never going to die. I don't think she is. She's eternally frozen in time and space. And so if you had to start somewhere, I would start it's being really clear. It's what are the things I want and what are the things that other people want for me? And where's
Mm,
that dissonance? That's a
mm.
really great place to start with getting over good girl syndrome.
I relate to so many of the things that you said, and I think that's such powerful advice. And truly the realization that not everyone's going to like you. And I've been going through it probably in the last year and a half, and I've always been kind of outspoken, but my past relationship kind of muted me, and like took my throat chakra and like crushed it. And I've
Mm.
been coming out of that for a while, and I've noticed the more empowered I am, and the way that I am direct is ruffling feathers because people get accustomed to you presenting in a certain way. So when you start to shift the dynamic, they have a choice on either to accept this new, better, I would say better, more authentic version of you, or they're going to try to push you back in that mold or that box, or kind of like frantically run away. And the idea that not everyone's going to like me and people are going to disagree with me has kept me for a long time from just being openly honest. And now I've realized the more open and authentic that I am, as far as my deeper inner thoughts and the reality of who I am, the dark side, the community has grown stronger. And even though my mom doesn't want to talk to me because I made a snowboard titty shirt, I'm like, it's for a festival, mom, no big deal. I can still stand in the playfulness of that sweater and be around people who are like, yeah, that's just fun, and mom will have to get over it, you know? Um, but good girl syndrome is it is something that I think some women go to their grave with, and that's not sovereignty to me.
No, and I there's almost a part of me because I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm completely over good girl syndrome. I can see when it wants to come up.
Mm.
Especially, I don't know if this is happening to you, but as you level up in whatever that means for you in your life, as you go expanding and growing, etc., I feel like there's new levels of good girl syndrome you didn't realize were there. Because again, the bigger you grow, the more you expand on whatever it is you're expanding on, the more your good girl syndrome is going to get fucking questioned.
Mm. So powerful and beautiful. Well, I'm curious, what is your definition of sovereignty?
Well, I think the short one is doing whatever the fuck you want. That's the short one.
Mm.
I think the longer one is finding a path of confidence, empowerment, and discernment, and honestly, hard decisions that are going to make sure that your best interest is in mind. Because I think with good girl syndrome, that would be called selfish, but you're all you got at the end of the day. And so, someone who's sovereign, it means you got you. You got you before other people got you. You're you and yourself. You're the only reliable resource you have for yourself. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself and that you're empowered and you can make choices for yourself, whether they be hard or really amazing.
Hmm. Preach. Yes, I love that. Okay, one last question. It's my favorite. If you could go back in time and give a younger you some words of advice or any words, what would you say and what age would you be?
Mm, that's hard. There's so many spots you'd want to go to, right? I know when I do my NLP stuff, I'm such a nightmare doing a timeline activity. I'm like, where do I go now? There's thousands of places to go.
Mm,
Um, but I think what I would do as a budding business owner when I started my business, or really when I started my passion and my route, because my passion has turned into my business, is listen more to myself and not to what others want. Because I think when starting, especially as a female in this space, I was so impressionable to what other people said you should be doing and should be teaching and should be presenting as. And only in the past couple years have I really taken the full stance of sovereignty and said, I'm going to do things my way. However
mm.
that lands, I don't care.
Magnificent. Well, love, the floor is yours. If there's anything you would like to close with, please do.
There's nothing else I'd like to close with other than a massive thank you. And it feels incredible to connect with you. And like I said, your moves have not been unnoticed, like watching you do your dominatrix work. And then are you doing Kundalini, right? Is that what you're
Yeah,
doing?
I'm doing Kundalini and Ayurveda, somatic sexology. Like, there's a lot of things happening over here.
Which ironically, again, they all tie into each other. And I've always loved your view because it's holistic. You get to have a little bit of everything. And even just opening a platform like this podcast is more than enough progress for some people to listen to and hopefully get their journey started as well.
Magnificent. Well, thank you, love. And where can everyone find you and your coaching and all the trainings that you're offering?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is julietachiara.com or the handle at Julieta Chiara on Instagram.
Magnificent. Well, thank you so much for being here, love.
Thank you for having me.